Good morning and welcome to our regular board meeting. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 9 a.m. Trustee Yegos is sending her regrets today that she can't be here, and Trustee Gimber will be joining us shortly. So I'm going to have Trustee Hodges give our land acknowledgement. We're just getting our screens up and going.
Okay, go ahead. Welcome to our division office located on the traditional land and territory of the Niitsitapi, Piikani, Kainai, and Siksika, the Blackfoot people, within the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta.
Thank you so much. Now we'll all rise for O Canada. Thank you all so much. Okay, so we're going to move to emergent changes to the agenda. The recommendation that the November 30th, 2021 regular board meeting agenda be approved by the Board of Trustees as presented or amended. Is there any emergent changes that need to come forward? Okay, seeing none at this time, can I get someone to make that motion? Trustee Hodges? Okay, and all in favor? Perfect, thank you. Looking for any declaration of conflict of interest. The recommendation that the Board of Trustees declare if they have any conflict of interest related to agenda items from the November 30th, 2021 board meetings, and if so, should declare them. Are there any trustees here now that have any conflicts of interest to declare? Okay, and Trustee Gimber let me know that she also doesn't when she was on the phone, so perfect. Okay, so we'll move on to our action items. D1 is our audited financial statements for the period ending August 31st, 2021. The audit committee will present information related to the recently completed audit and form the draft audited financial statements for the period ending August 31st, 2021. The recommendation that the Board of Trustees approve the audited financial statements for Livingston Range School Division for the period ending August 31st, 2021. Can I get someone to make that motion? Trustee Hodges, thank you. And I will turn it over to Trustee Hodges as chair of that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Last night we were able to meet with our auditors and go through our audited financial statements. I know it was kind of a quick meeting. Well, it was quick and long at the same time, but we were able to ask some great questions and go through our statements. I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Perry to take us through our audited financial statements and bring relative information to us. And then if there's any questions, we can answer them at the end.
Okay, thank you. I'll take you through a summary of the year end, which is actually the fourth quarter. We've been reporting on each quarter, and this is the fourth quarter, but it ends up being the year end, and this one comes as a report from the audited financial statements. So certainly those who are on the committee, if you want to jump in anywhere, feel free to make comments or identify any notes that are important. So you can go to the next slide, Nikki. So this is the audit committee report. We could have provided you a copy of the financial statements. I'm not sure that would do you any good in the short, time frame to review them. So we'll give you a summary of the findings by the auditor, what their roles and responsibilities are, as well as what the end result for the year looked like. So as of August 31st, 2021, we're 100% through the fiscal year and 100% of the school year. Like was mentioned, the committee met with the auditors yesterday, which was a great meeting. The members of the audit committee include Trustee Lori Hodges, Audit Committee Chair, Trustee Lacey Poitras, our Board Chair, Trustee Carla Gimber, and two public members, which is Marilyn Welsh and Martha Ratcliffe, and everyone attended the meeting last night. Okay. Management in attendance were Jeff Perry, myself, Associate Superintendent Business Services, Anthony Burdett, who is a Director of Finance and has a huge role in putting together the financial statements. We are not members of the committee, but we attend as bringing information to the committee. So the presentation by the auditors, I just wanted to quote some of the information that they've provided. They've indicated that they've audited the financial statements of the Livingston Range School Division, and they conducted their audit in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. They note that management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. Those are the standards that we follow in preparing those documents. It is their objective to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, and to issue an auditor's report that includes an opinion. And we are independent, so they are independent of the school division in accordance with the ethical requirements that are relevant to our audit of the financial statements. So that's pretty important that they identify in our meeting that they're independent from us. They don't rely upon us for their sole earnings in a year. They have no relationship with any members that are on the committee that are making any decisions and so forth, and so that's pretty important to them to identify. Okay, Nikki. And finally, in their opinion, the accompanying financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the school division as of August 31st, 2021. And its results of operations, its remeasurement gains and losses, and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So that opinion, you're fine there, Nikki. That opinion is a clean opinion. And so in their opinion, the financial statements do reflect the financial position of the board as of August 31st, 2021. So the audit committee went through, or the auditors went through the entire financial statement with the audit committee. The audit committee was free to ask any questions related to the statements themselves. They also asked questions in relation to how the audit went with management, whether there was any, restrictions put upon them by management or anything of that nature. And so some of their comments are that management gave full access to the books and records. Auditors were not limited in their ability to complete a full audit, and the one management point continues to be that the division continue to work on policies and procedures in the area, should be area of school-generated funds. So that's an ongoing discussion we had last night with regards to our movement towards how in smaller schools we continue to segregate duties to ensure that resources are managed appropriately. And so that's an ongoing, we had a dialogue with the auditors about that, and the audit committee asked questions in relation to that. And the auditors felt that things were going well. So if audit committee members understand that differently, then you can speak up, because I'm management talking about this point, but go ahead, Lacey.
I will just say that we made sure to ask the auditors, were there any major differences or disagreements? Was there anything that you found that you think should be brought to our attention or that we need to improve upon significantly for next year? Or, you know, last year there was a few things that we were looking at that they said that we had improved on, and they said, what was his exact words? They're very proactive and forward-thinking here in Livingston Range, and so we didn't have any major discrepancies, which was really nice to hear. So I will say I don't feel differently than you. We asked a lot of questions around that to make sure we were getting the full picture, and they were very confident in our team, as are we.
Next slide, Nikki. Okay, so the actual results of the financial, the audit or the financial statements is that we currently have $13.8 million in financial assets, which includes cash, accounts receivable, investments. That's an increase of about $634,000 from the prior year. We have $8.7 million in liabilities, accounts payable, deferred revenues. That ARO should not be in there, so ignore that. That was something that was not addressed in this year because it was extended to be able to deal with it in the following year. But accounts payable, deferred revenues, and that is an increase of about $355,000 in liabilities. The net of that is $5.1 million in net financial assets. So net financial assets means we have the ability to address any current obligations, or we're above and beyond the current obligations that are currently in there. There is $52.6 million in non-financial assets. That's your capital items, so your buildings, your buses, your equipment, and other things such as prepaids, which include where we've paid for insurance upfront and or software, and we recognize that over the time period that it is used. There's $44.6 million in deferred capital contributions. So for the most part, this is money that has been spent, but is amortized over the same time period as the expenditures of the amortization of the assets. So it's funding that we receive from the government to match the amortization expense that we incur on a yearly basis. And so there's an outstanding balance of that, and that'll be amortized over time. And that leaves us with a $13.1 million net assets. So operating and capital reserves, invested in capital, those are the types of assets. That is an increase of about $864,000 from the prior year, which, if you go to the next slide, matches what our surplus was. Okay, so that represents an increase from the prior year. Okay, continue to the next one. Okay, so when you think of the dollars in, dollars out on an accrued basis, so recognizing that even if we haven't received the dollars, but we are owed the dollars, then we would set up a receivable. And if we owe dollars that we haven't spent yet or paid out yet, we recognize that as a payable. So that's what accrual means. So there's almost $53 million in revenue. That was 99% of our budget. We expended almost $52 million, which is 97% of our budget. And so you can see that if we almost got all of our revenues, and we got less, almost all of our expenditures, but less than the budget, then you're going to have a surplus. And in our case, we have an $846,000. Oh, another error. So sorry, I put this together quickly. You can take the $1 million out there. It's $846,186,000. Can you go back? Sorry. Right there. Yeah, I don't think you can edit it. I think you're just a viewer. So So $846,188 is the surplus. And so our revenues were, and then I gave a greater detail of what that breakdown was. So the 1% of revenues is about $528,000. So we were under that amount. However, we received almost $1.3 million in safe return to school, which we put towards our online programs. However, there was other areas where we did not receive what we had budgeted for, and the First Nation revenue is one where we had fewer students attend from the reserves close by, and so there was less funding in that area. There was significantly less activity in our schools, meaning that our fees and our school-generated funds were going to be significantly less. And so that together is almost $1.3 million to offset the federal monies. In addition to that, we found out mid-year that the money that we had received, which from Alberta Education would need to be paid back to the tune of $332. We've talked about weighted moving average, so our weighted moving average was lower than what we had projected it to be. And of course, we thought going into this year that it would be a normal year, but it was not. And so our enrollment was lower, and it was identified that we would owe the government $332,000 back of the funding that they provided us. And so that was set up. In addition to that, we received $270,000 for a critical worker benefit that we actually just flowed through to our employees, where they received, certain employees within the jurisdiction received a benefit from the government of $1,200 or something like that. And so it just flowed through us. The net of that is about $528,000 lower than what we had originally budgeted. So I just wanted to give you kind of the main areas as to why we were lower than what we had budgeted in our revenues. And so if we, by all means, if you guys have questions, let me know, but just interrupt. But we'll go to the next slide. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry. Owing the $332,000 back to the government, is that something that's happening for a lot of divisions? Because it wasn't another normal school year. Is there lots of divisions across the province who are facing similar issues and having to have that owe back to the government?
Yes, in the discussions I've had with other jurisdictions, almost every jurisdiction is having an adjustment, and the majority of the divisions that I've spoken with, their payback to the government is significantly higher than $332,000. We're fortunate that our projections were with the lack of knowledge, because we have to make those projections in January as to what our enrollment is going to be in September, and so you're likely not to guess exactly right. 332,000 is actually pretty small compared to what other jurisdictions are experiencing. There's many jurisdictions that are over $1 million owing back to the government in that scenario. So we were fortunate that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so and I'll just make a comment on surpluses as well. As you all know, and we've shared with you over the last couple quarters, I mean, the year was pretty uncertain. There was a lot of reasons as to why we have a surplus at the end of this year. Much of that is because of the expenditures that we did not expend, and that's what I'm going to go through right now. And so we budgeted for the most part, a normal year moving into the 2020-21 year. We know that we were in a pandemic. We know that school had been out and that students had been online, but we were heading toward a different year and accommodating that with students back in school. However, there were still things that did not occur in the 2020-21 school year that resulted in underspending in certain areas. So just to go through some of the dynamics or some of the information, certificated staff, we actually, when we received the almost $1.3 million in funding from the federal to the provincial to us, we implemented an online learning system so we could accommodate those students attending from home. We put in close to 11 additional teaching staff for that program, just to ensure that we accommodated those at school and those that were online. However, with salary and benefits, we only were over in that area by about $470,000. Some of the reason for that is that even though you try and hire teachers right away, you have to go through a process and it takes a while to get them in place. We also had an anticipation that subs would be significantly higher, so we budgeted as such. And that wasn't the end result. The end result was not that. They may have been a little bit higher, but not as high as we have budgeted. So that reduced our overage in the area of certificated salaries and benefits. In the support staff side, we had contingencies in place and so forth. We actually, and with people going out and trying to rehire, we actually had a surplus in that area, so we had about $350,000 left over in that area. Services contract and supplies in the instruction area. This is, for the most part, school activities were significantly lesser. So if you match it up against the revenue, the 660 and the 619,000 reduced revenue, we basically didn't have those funds to expend, and so there was almost a $1.3 million decrease in what was expended out at the school in this area. In addition, there's other areas where PD was not as much, travel was not as much, and just given that most of our meetings were online, so you can see that even in the instruction block, PD was under 77,000, travel was under 115,000. In our maintenance area, we actually overexpended what the budget was by about $52,000. The majority of that is because we had budgeted for COVID supplies, but we were over about $114,000 in COVID supplies. Our insurance was actually under $112,000. So if you remember, we're setting up this budget in March and April, but our renewal and what we know our rates to be is not known until October. And so because our insurance was so high the year before, we budgeted for it to be similar to that level, and actually we received a reduction. And going through our new consortium and negotiating our rates on our own behalf, we were able to receive a reduction in there. And then there were some other things that were over in that area. But those were the major areas. Transportation was under by about $400,000. We actually had a mild winter last year. And believe it or not, that has a huge impact on repairs and maintenance, which we were under about $234,000. Fuel was under $131,000, and one position of a mechanic was not filled, and so that's $66,000 under there. System admin was under $249,000. Travel, the major areas were travel and subsistence. Most of our meetings were online. Contracted services, there was many services that we did not need to engage in. Negotiations is one of them. We didn't have any negotiations last year, and so there was no consulting for that. In addition, our legal was down in that area as well. Professional development was down 39. A lot of things were free online. Supplies was down about 14,000. Insurance was down about 12. So those are kind of the major areas as to where dollars were underexpended. In some cases, they were overexpended, and those were planned. But again, the year did not go as planned, and so there was many areas where we underspent, and so that is what results in the surplus in the end of the day. Okay. So when you look at that, we have an $846,000 surplus. We had actually budgeted to use $666,000 out of our reserves. And so there's a significant swing there based on the results that I just went through with you. The impact, and we know that the government has a threshold as to where we should be, and we were working towards being there. Again, the majority of the school divisions in the province are experiencing a surplus based on what they had budgeted. And so how that impacts our reserves, we actually decrease in unrestricted surplus. We increase in operating reserves of about 940,000, and we decrease in our capital reserves of about 560,000. And the decrease in capital reserves obviously is for the purchase of the Crow's Nest Pass facility and the land out there, in addition to buses, equipment, and so forth. But the net of that is a decrease of $560,000. So in increasing the operating reserve, we've set up a transition fund for the following years where revenues will be lower. So any reserves that have been from the surplus have been transferred to operating reserves have been to deal with the following 2 years where our revenues will be significantly lower. At this point, we'd have no indication as to whether there will be any bridge funding for the following year, so we have to anticipate that there won't be, which means that we'll be down $2 million in the following budget that we're moving towards. As such, maintaining a reasonable reserve to deal with contingent items, emergent items is important, while also having a fund that will allow us to transition to a lower level of funding is the key there. So that's really where the setup of reserves have gone, and we anticipate accessing that in the year that we're in and potentially the year beyond that. So I think that's it. Is that it? That's it. So that's really the summary of the financial statements. So first of all, you've heard that the auditors provided a clean opinion on the audited financial statements. The audit committee was able to go through the statements with them and ask as many questions as possible to ensure that they're comfortable with the audit itself and that the position reflects where we're at. And then we've gone through some of the rationale as to why we resulted in that. So I'll leave it with that, Madam Chair, and if there's any questions that anyone would like to ask, then we're more than willing to. Anthony's here. He's more than willing to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. We appreciate all the work you put into these presentations and all the work that goes into getting these ready. So are there trustees that have some questions on the presentation today? Trustee Hodges and then Trustee Toon.
Thank you. I appreciate the fact that we are able to use our operating reserves for a transition fund for the following years, because I know we'll be losing about $2.2 million. I still feel like we need to, I'm glad we have these funds to help us transition to that, but moving on past those funds, is there a plan in place to work within the budget that we're going to be given, unfortunately, due to the government, and still work with the government, hopefully, to realize that the weighted moving average isn't necessarily working for school divisions and having enough funds to run our school divisions as we need to. And so I know we have this reserve, but we won't have that in the future, and this reserve will only last for this next school year. Is that kind of the plan? And then what's the plan past that?
You're absolutely right that reserves, once used, are no longer there. And the reserve is set up to maintain a reasonable amount of reserves to be able to deal with emergent things in the future. What the transition fund would be for is to allow us to acclimate ourselves to a lower level of funding. So cushion that over a time period versus go from what we are now to losing $2 million all at once. So we would intend to run planned deficits in the following years to use up that transition funding to allow us to do it in a slower, more accommodating manner than just all of a sudden. So yeah, there is a plan in place, and we continue to work on that daily. We've been working on that for actually a couple of years. The government has maintained the level of funding, even though the year that we were in, we were supposed to lose $1 million. We did not lose $1 million. They maintained the funding that we had from the prior year. So that was a good thing. With regards to the funding framework itself, the WMA is only one component of the funding. And so in some areas it works, in some areas it doesn't. We've talked about the summer school funding and how not operating phases for one summer has really impacted the level of funding that we have for summer school. And as you know, there's the advocacy committee put together a communication to the Minister of Education to seek, you know, reprise from that year. And if you look at 20 years before that, or maybe not so long, even just 5 years before that, the level of FACES programming was significantly higher. We went from almost a $1.2 million program down to this year we get 300 and I think it's $80,000. So that's a significant decrease just because we weren't able to operate FACES in the 2020 summer. So it didn't work for us in that scenario. It may work in other areas, but overall, when you look at the entire funding framework, we're losing about just over $2 million in funding. And so the plan is in place for using the transition funding for that to allow us to slowly move to a lower level of funding and live within the budget that we get. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Toon.
Thank you. Great report as always. Amazing to see all the work that's done throughout the division. My question is, do you have the numbers for this year versus last year for percentage of what our reserves are sitting at? Because that's kind of the magic number that the government looks at.
Yeah, we do. So I've put together, I've already adjusted the facts sheet that we do on reserves. And I was going to bring that today, but I think there's a slight change that I need to make to it, so I didn't. I believe where we're at is about 7.2%. That is what I needed to look into, and I need to make sure that that's correct, and then I'll adjust this document and we'll provide it to you and put it online. But we were working towards being at the 5% threshold, which the Alberta Education is indicated is the appropriate level of reserves. And so we know that we're over that 5% and we'll continue to be over that 5%, even though we were aiming to be under it by the end of this year. So the communication, again, is that those funds will be used up in the short term to get under that, to be within that threshold as we use it for transition funding. So I'll give you the exact numbers once I confirm them, but yeah, sorry, I can't give you the exact number right now.
Thanks. No, I understand it's challenging, especially with meeting last night with the committee. It's a short turnaround and did a great job bringing this forward. So short term, does that mean within a year we'd be under the 5%, or is this a 2-year plan to get under, or?
It's potentially a 2-year plan if you include this year. So that said, we are monitoring this year to ensure that we live within the budget that we, not live within, but that we expend what we said we were going to expend on. And then the plan for the next budget, which we'll go through in March, will definitely put us within that threshold.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Toon.
Thanks. Yeah, I kind of answered it in part. My follow-up would be what discussions are taking place to ensure that ongoing adjustments are made, so increases are made in other areas to make sure that we keep on that level or go above and beyond what we had originally budgeted. I know it's hard when the biggest expense is people and we can't increase in some of those areas. But my concern is in the discussions that I've had with Treasury and some of the stuff at the provincial level, that we're all in the same situation in the province with the unprecedented times and so many uncertainty going forward. But they use that uncertainty and the lack of spending as justification to not give us bridge funding or other areas. So if we can spend the dollars, as we always say, we want to spend today's dollars on today's kids, that we make sure that we're spending as much as we can to keep that level so we don't get increases. Because as I've been a trustee for 8 years, and there's always things that are happening, and we see these things bump up from year to year. I know this year was off the charts different, but what kind of plans are in place to make those adjustments in year to keep on track? Thanks.
Yeah, we're already monitoring this year with regards to where we're going to end up. We've already added additional supports in the schools in the learning support area in recognition that there might be some areas that are underfunded. So the plans are that we continue to monitor and address some of those items that we need, not to spend in a willy-nilly, but a planned and targeted response to having dollars available. We know that there's potentially other things such as technology evergreening or those things that we can address now that may have been delayed and deferred in the past. So it's just, the key is ongoing monitoring and recognizing that when we have resources available to be able to expend those on the other things that have potentially not been completed in the past.
Thank you, and thank you to the committee again for bringing us a great report and doing the awesome work that you guys do looking after all this.
Thank you, Trustee Toon. Is there any other questions? Do you have any questions about the audited financial report that you wanted to ask today? I know that Trustee Gimber is on the committee, and so she got the full version of it. So perfect, thank you. Is there just a question from me? As we've switched the funding formula and moving to this 3-year weighted moving average, have we been able to kind of assess in a long term, is it both predictable and sustainable funding, or have we not been able to determine that due to having the pandemic and the impacts that has had? Was switching the funding format a positive thing provincially, do you think, or will it be?
Put me on the spot here.
Sorry.
No, I think in many ways we were after you know, not only targeted funding, but knowing what our budget would be in the spring and not having it change in the fall was something that was very valuable to us. The challenge with what happened this year is, you know, the repayment of the $332,000. So in year, we were told that we were going to have to set up a liability, which in essence means you don't get those funds. And so is it really predictable after that, right? So because it's an in-year adjustment to the enrollment, or when you don't realize the enrollment that you projected, and 50% of our funding in many areas, the WMA is based on what we project in January, right? And so if we were to be able to maintain those dollars and have an adjustment in the following year, you could adjust to that. But we found out this year that we were going to have to set up a payable of $332,000. And as such, that means it reduced our funding. So had we been right on budget, we would have had a $332,000 greater deficit than we had originally planned. This year it didn't work out that way for other reasons that we went through. But so is it predictable? I guess it really depends on how well you can predict from January for September.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Mr. Perry, but I appreciate you always willing to share the information that you do have and can share. So I appreciate that. So once again, the recommendation is that the Board of Trustees approve the audited financial statements for Livingston Range School Division for the period ending August 31st, 2021. It was moved by Trustee Hodges. All in favor? Perfect, thank you so much. And again, thank you to the committee and to the team who worked so hard on that. We appreciate it. So now we're going to move on to D2, which is our annual education results report. Mr. Darrell Seguin, our superintendent, will review the 2020-2021 annual education results report from the board for the Board of Trustees approval. The recommendation is that the Board of Trustees approve the 2020-2021 annual education result report for the Livingston Range School Division. Can I get someone to make that motion? Thank you, Trustee Stankiewicz. And with that, I will turn it over to our superintendent to go ahead with the report. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate some time to be able to go through the 2020-2021 annual education results report with you. As you know, this particular year was probably unlike any other at least in my career, and probably in your tenure as a trustee as well, with the pandemic and everything that was that impacted our education system. With the pandemic, with limited extracurricular activities, cohorting in place, masking, students moving back and forth from in-person classes to online and then back to in-person, and depending on the school and the community and the number of cases, for some students that was more often than others, for sure. But I just want to start out, if Nikki could turn to the next page. I'll take you through, as you know, this is the first year that we are using and reporting on the new model rather than the accountability pillar. We're in the assurance framework now. And so in the assurance framework, you can see that we've got 5 domains. If you scroll up a little bit, so there, student growth and achievement is number 1, teaching and leading number 2, learning supports number 3, governance number 4, and then local and societal context is number 5. And so that's how this report is structured this year. And that is certainly a different format than in the past. But I'm excited about some of the changes, because I think it allows us a little more freedom and flexibility to tell our story. And especially that last piece around the local and societal context, which we'll save the best for last. So let's turn to page 5. You've had this report now for a week or 2 anyway, and had an opportunity to review it, but I'll take you through some of the highlights. Throughout this document, sorry, Nikki, on the mission, vision, and core values, yeah. Throughout this document, you will see these important pieces, these foundational elements of our school division integrated throughout the document. So our mission, Livingston Range School Division inspires excellence through meaningful relationships, innovation, and collaboration. And then our vision of every student every day. And certainly you will also see very clearly our core values of being student-centered, leadership, integrity, wellness, and place-based. So on page 6, we summarize some of the stakeholder engagement activities. One of the main components of the new assurance model and focus is that on stakeholder engagement. And the Board of Trustees has done an excellent job in trying to engage stakeholders in planning and reporting processes. So we did engage stakeholders in a thought exchange in November around future school year calendars and what was important and what should be considered. And we heard some messages like, some longer breaks, starting school after Labor Day. We know that's not always possible, but that was a comment there for sure that came through. And then the importance of wellness and family time being key considerations for developing a school year calendar. So we acted on that in our current school year calendar, which was shared publicly in early 2021. You notice that it did include longer breaks around holidays to encourage more time for wellness. And one of those examples is just what we experienced earlier this month with that week in February where students were not in class. Staff had Divisional Day on the Monday, Interschool Collaboration Day on the Tuesday, and then a site-based professional development day on the Wednesday. And then staff were able to have the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off as well. And the feedback from some of the administrators that I've been in conversation with since then was that was very needed, especially in this year. It was very timely, and it's been well received. We also acted on some information that came from that thought exchange around comments around a potential 4-day week or a full day week, and the board then surveyed stakeholders a little bit further and found that there was sufficient interest to pursue more conversation and exploration around a 4-day school week. And so in September, senior admin brought back some information to trustees, and so that's something that will be ongoing. In February of 2021, the thought exchange focused on defining student success. We know that in Livingston Range School Division, as in any provincial education system, academics are certainly one component of defining success for students, but we wanted to find out what other things were really important to our stakeholders. We heard from them that student engagement, safe and caring schools, and life skills are other important components to have in a school system. So we acted on that. We have a student success plan that was developed. We call it Student Success Plan 2021 to 2024. And in there are these focus areas that were identified. And so that's something that we'll be working at over the next few years. Let's move along to page 9. So these are our wildly important goals. You're all familiar with them. Our hopes and dreams for our students and staff is that everybody recognizes that they have leadership potential. And how do we bring out the best in people, and how do we use that and have students realize their potential and use that to benefit themselves, their school, their community, and so forth. Culture is the next area, and this was something that was very clear as well in our stakeholder engagement, that safe and caring schools was really important, and we want our kids to be engaged as well, and so that culture is another key area of focus for us over the next few years. And of course, academics. Any educational institution, academics are important, and we want to engage parents and children more in their learning. So those you'll see throughout the document too. The next page. The Alberta Education Assurance Measures, the overall summary here replaces the old accountability pillar. This is the first year that these survey questions were asked. Some of the questions are the same from the past, but not all of them are, and they're grouped a little bit differently. So you won't see, so on the right, you'll notice there's only a couple of color-coded areas, whereas in the past you had color-coded legend for each of those target areas. But being that this is the first year and this is a baseline, it will take some time for the 3-year average, of course, to appear, and with the colors to start to show up on this report. But overall, LRSD did very well, with most of our results being very close to provincial averages in all of those categories. The next page is our First Nations, Metis, and Inuit overall summary. As you know, in the past, there's still a lot of work to do in this area for sure with our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students. On this particular report, being that the data was very limited with no PATs and no diplomas and that sort of thing happening this year, and the first year of the new questions, there's only really data there for the 3- and 5-year high school completion rates. I will take you through some of the strategies that we had implemented last year a little bit later on when we get to that section. So the first of 5 domains on page 12 is the student growth and achievement area. And we're pleased to see that Livingston Range School Division students still felt engaged in their learning opportunities throughout the year, no matter what platform that happened, whether it was in person or whether it was online. I think our teachers did a very good job of trying to make the best of both worlds there for sure. Under citizenship, if you scroll up a little bit, it's hard to see because it's so tiny, but citizenship, LRSD results have historically been below provincial average, but for the last 2 years, the LRSD results are above provincial average. And we know that from that stakeholder engagement that was issued in February of 2021, that safe and caring schools are important pieces of success for our parents and our staff. And so that aligns very well with our goals, overall arching goals of leadership and culture, and where everybody is responsible for positive change. Our high school completion rates, you can see on there, we have that improved significantly, which is nice to see. We have hired career practitioners, we've got academic counselors in our schools, and it's nice to see that our 3-year graduation rates are increasing. And our schools have recently implemented a collaborative response model as well with a learning support team in every school. We had those in the past, but they're a little more focused. Some of the work that we've been doing with jigsaw learning. Last year we started that. We're continuing it this year, and we're hopeful that that will continue to show good results. Due to COVID, the diploma preparation programs and Rock the Diploma, that sort of thing, wasn't offered to students, but we're trying to get those back going again this year. The next domain on page 14, teaching and leading. So there's some results there from the assurance survey, and then down below you will see another measure that is taken from the Our School survey. Yeah, you can just scroll down there a little bit. Okay. So LRSD staff, much like those across the province, had to quickly shift from in-person to online learning and back again, depending on the number of COVID cases kind of in the class and in the school and that sort of thing. But it's nice to see that we did ensure high quality teaching and learning continued regardless of the platform. Also under teaching and learning, we had a group of aspiring leaders be involved in professional development. It started actually in 2019, but because of the pandemic, we didn't finish that until 2020. 12 of our staff ended up completing that program, and 3 of them ended up in school leadership positions at this time. Let's move along to page 16, learning supports. So the 2 main areas of this component, this domain, are the welcoming, caring, respectful, and safe learning environments, and the access to supports and services. And you can see that in both of those, we were slightly above the provincial average. And so I think that just shows some of the good work that we've been doing in our schools, that our Director of Learning Support Services, Lisa Furukawa, has been working with our schools a lot on making sure that students get what they need. It's always a challenge. There's always a scarcity of resources out there, but overall it looks like we're doing a really good job in that. We also have other team members that should be noticed or mentioned. And so our registered psychologist, Dr. Massey, who you heard from earlier, I guess, this month, and her team of school counselors are doing a great job. We actually, with the pandemic, we know that mental health concerns have increased. And so our students are dealing with a lot. And so last year we actually increased the FTE that was allocated out there in our schools to provide that access to counseling services. We know that in our rural communities, sometimes our families cannot get the access outside of school that they require, or they would have to travel a long distance to get them. And so we're doing what we can, and it was a priority for the board to try and provide some additional supports in those areas. And so we were able to use some of the dollars that we had to increase the FSL support in our schools. And then of course we've got the career practitioners and the 2 off-campus teachers as well, who continued even during the pandemic to provide work experience placements, RAP, and green certificate work as well. Page 18. This identifies, if we go down a little bit to the strategies there, I just wanted to take you through some of the things that we had tried to implement around the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education in LRSD. And to provide a little context, just a reminder that close to 10% of our student population is First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, mainly coming from students coming from Kainai and Piikani. And so while we have an Indigenous elder that is available to all schools at, through arrangements, they can access the services of an elder at every school in our school division if needed. And many of our schools do. But 4 of our schools with a higher First Nations, Métis, and Inuit population have access to elders more frequently. And so that is something that is proving to be valuable for sure. they were in the schools last year and could provide that, in-person support to all students, but in particular our First Nations students too. We really have been, we've had it on the books for the last couple of years to run an Indigenous land camp. And so we've had staff trained through Actua, and the camp is, ready to go. We're hopeful again this year that we will be able to run that in the spring of 2022. Due to the pandemic last year, we were unable to, but we're hoping that that can happen this year. Yes.
Is that land camp, is that based around that grant money that we received also? Was that developed with some of that money as well?
Yeah, Richard, do
Yeah.
you want to add
Okay.
anything?
Sorry,
in
we
on
don't need to
that
dive
at
right
all?
into, but I was just wondering if that was the same thing that we were talking about when that grant
Yes.
money originally came.
That's
so-
part of the dollars that we
Yeah.
received were to go to train our staff
Yeah.
and to carry out the camp
Wonderful.
and
Okay.
to compensate our facilitators and that sort of thing. So
Thank you.
hopefully
for-
that can
yeah.
happen this
Thanks
spring.
for that clarity.
Our our First Nations Métis and Inuit Success Coordinator continued to work with our teachers and with other school leaders around the teaching quality standard number 5, learning about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit perspectives and experiences, treaties, and history of and legacy of residential schools. And we created that document. I hope you've had a chance to look at it. I know that Sandra shared it with you in the past, but it's a really neat summary of the calls to action and what we are doing in LRSD to work towards that. So that's something that is certainly ongoing for sure. And then just to remind you, we do have a staff representative from every school in the division who continue to meet regularly, met regularly last year, I should say, to build that capacity in all of our schools. All right, we're almost there. A couple more areas. Domain number 4, which is on governance. I just wanted to highlight on page 19 that over the last 2 years, the Board of Trustees have engaged stakeholders more often in preparation for their decision-making responsibilities. And this has been purposeful on your part as well, that you wanted to hear from stakeholders. And so we've got our communications, culture, and engagement person in Carly Bond, and we purchased software to be able to help us engage the public even during the pandemic through a virtual mean. And so those things have been very valuable. We've used them to gain some insight from our stakeholders on the different priorities that we should consider around budgeting. We gained insight into our mission, vision, and core values creation, defining student success, and in the division calendar development also. I would just add as well one more unique thing, I think, it doesn't happen all across the province, is that you as trustees sit on and attend our school council meetings out there. That doesn't happen everywhere in the province. And so you're constantly in the loop at those meetings, not only providing an update from the board, but also being there to listen to the parents and the staff, and maybe even once in a while students at those school council meetings as well. And so gathering feedback all the time. All right, let's jump to the last domain. I told you we'd save the best for last, page 21. This is the area of local and societal context. And so you can see our core values up there being student-centered, leadership, integrity, wellness, and place-based. And some of the things that have been highlighted here in this report, I think really show how much of a focus we have on place-based education and leadership in LRSD. So you've got some examples there, like the Day on the Creek, which has been running for a little while. The students out at Horace Allen go on wonder walks all the time and use the park as a classroom. You know, they're always learning and visiting that area for sure. The Ski Academy's been up and running with a great partnership with Castle Mountain for a number of years. And I think recently I shared with you a banner that they had made for a parade where, you know, their classroom was the ski hill basically, right? And so they've taken that to heart. The school as a base camp, community as a classroom philosophy, and the 3 Crow's Nest Pass schools has been valuable out there. And then, of course, some outdoor pursuits programming at Crow's Nest Consolidated School. So in addition to that, if you scroll down a little bit, Nikki, the Livingston Leaders, formerly known as the Regional Council of Student Leaders, has really, just really taken a nice turn in the direction that they're heading, with a couple of staff leading the work that they're doing there and providing leadership opportunities for those students. They have an executive, and they're working with their schools on different school improvement kind of aspects as well, and getting more involved in school improvement. And of course, we couldn't close this section without mentioning our FACES summer education program. We're so happy that it was able to run again this past summer, not in its full form, as it has been historically, but a modified form due to the pandemic, and we're anxious for the full return of that program. But kids really gain a huge benefit from attending that, and again, we had over 400 students attend that summer school experience last year. So I've taken you through very, very quickly the annual education results report. The other pieces there, I'm not going to go into any detail, but on page 22, it talks about the summary of financial results. Jeff and the audit committee just went through the audited financial statements there. I guess we could just quickly jump to, let's see, page 30. Page 30 outlines our the 3-year capital plan for the Board of Trustees and the 10-year facility plan. And so priority number 1 is still the community of Nanton. And that's a continual advocacy point for the trustees. And we haven't forgot about this to the public. I would say we haven't forgot about this. We're continuing to work at that. The Board of Trustees is strong advocates of the modernization for the Nanton solution there. And then right behind that project is the community of Lundbrick for right-sizing and modernizing Livingston School. So with that, I think we'll close and just see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seguin. We appreciate the report and seeing all the celebrations and areas that we're working on improving. I'm going to see if there's any questions from the trustees at this time. Trustee Long.
A statement, Mr. Seguin, based on contact information, sharing with students, staff, administration here, trustees, I definitely think that our culture, our school community is really grown positively. In the last 4 years since I've been a trustee, I've seen a wonderful, positive feeling in our schools, and I congratulate you all.
Thank you on that. I recently received a retirement notice from one of our longtime staff members, and in there, there was mixed feelings, because even though they've had a long career with us, they're so excited about the future of Livingston Range School Division and the direction that we're headed. So I hope that is captured in this document for sure.
Thank you so much. Trustee Hodges.
It's really great to see this AERR, because in the pandemic we could have chose not to move ahead with a lot of our initiatives, our engagement, and everything like that. We weren't sure where we were, where it was headed, and what was going to happen. So it's really encouraging to see this and all the great things that we were still able to accomplish in the multiple years of the pandemic now. And so I'm excited to share this with the public and show all the great stuff that's still going on in Livingston Range, and that we still hold ourselves accountable and that higher arc. So it was really awesome to see that. So thank you.
Thank you. Other trustees? Trustee Toon?
Thank you. Yeah, just want to echo what other trustees have said. The ability for us to not just tread water the past year and a half, but continue to move forward on important initiatives and to grow. I know that some of the things that we haven't been able to do, like athletics and things like that, were sorely missed, but the feedback that I've got from stakeholders saying that how great it was for their kids to do all the things that they were able to do when you saw neighbors and relatives in other areas that weren't able to do those things. I just want to give a huge kudos to that. Seeing the results and that we were able to maintain despite the difficult challenges. What are some key areas that you see going forward that attributed to that? And what are some things that we're doing? I know we've talked about the continuous improvement index and possibility of that, but what are some areas that you're doing to monitor the data gaps? Because some, like we say, PATs and so many things aren't happening. I know you've talked about it before, but just I thought this would be a good opportunity to highlight some of those things.
Thank you. Yeah, I would certainly say our ability to be able to continue to move forward is certainly reflective of the support and the direction of the Board of Trustees, along with the close working relationship that you have with senior admin and with our school leadership. And so really they're on the front lines, and they were able to continue to motivate staff, to support them in their efforts. There's a lot of gray areas out there with the pandemic. Everything wasn't always black and white. And so, you know, a lot of collaborative leadership has taken place between senior management and school principals, but also I would say between school principals and their staff. And so our staff are just so professional. They always want what's best for kids. And, you know, where possible, they really wanted to still have the field trips, the learning opportunities for kids. And so they went to the extra efforts to find ways to be able to still do that under the pandemic restrictions. And I think, you know, as much as possible, they wanted to create still stimulating learning environments, that sort of thing. And so I have to give kudos to our staff and our school leadership for their continued efforts in there. As far as going forward, one thing that we are looking at is trying to standardize a literacy and a numeracy assessment for our school division so that there's consistency and alignment across the division. So we could take a look at any given point in time, you know, how are our students doing in their reading, in their writing? How are our students doing in their numeracy skills? And then be able to work with Mr. Kuzik and his literacy committee and his numeracy committee, and to be able to target specific strategies and interventions so that we can continue to show improvement. And so that's one of the areas that we are looking at implementing this year. We've had a lot of work over the past few years to try to bring more alignment and more consistency, still allowing some individual site flexibility, right? And so it's a fine balance, and we're moving forward with many of those things. We've got some common assessments like the MRA that has been happening out there in the schools right now. That's going to provide some useful perception data to us as well. But you know, as far as the academic pieces, the PATs and diplomas are like lag measures. They're like after the fact, right? And so what can we be doing to assess and then make course corrections and assess a little bit later on to more closely monitor that improvement over time. And so I know Chad has been exploring some different options out there for some standardized assessment across the jurisdiction. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much. Is there questions from any other trustees at this time? No? Okay. So I just want to thank you again for your report. It has been a difficult few years, and it is tough not having, you know, that consistent data, but we appreciate you collecting all the information that you have and can and using it to the best of your ability. I think a lot of people, when they see our information on, you know, we want to be place-based. What is that? What does that mean? We've had a lot of questions around that. It's so nice to have these examples of place-based learning that we can share as an example of what exactly that means. So thank you so much. So the recommendation that was moved by Trustee Stankiewicz is that the Board of Trustees approve the 2020-2021 Annual Education Result Report for the Livingston Range School Division. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you so much. All right. So at this time, at 10:09, we will adjourn the meeting. The recommendation is that the Board of Trustees vote in favor of the meeting being adjourned at 10:09. Can I get someone to make that motion? Trustee Long, all in favor? Thank you. All right, thank you guys so much.